Hi, this video is going to briefly cover how to break down a content standard to create a lesson objective. This is in relation to creating a lesson objective for the lesson plan that you create for this course and for any lesson plan that you do in the future. You always want to begin a lesson plan by determining which content standard you're going to be working towards. Many of your districts will have this very clearly outlined regarding which standard you're working on at what point in the school year. If you're teaching in a mild to moderate classroom, you will have students who have IEPs. And part of writing a high quality IEP is making sure that the goals and objectives are aligned with the appropriate content standards for that student, depending on what grade he or she is in. In addition to this, you may have the opportunity, well, hopefully you have the opportunity to work collaboratively with a general education teacher, even as an intervention specialist. And one of the best parts of that relationship is getting to know what they're working on in their classroom with students without disabilities, because that should always be your end goal, is to make sure that the students that you're working with IEPs are making progress towards those same content standards. So I thought I would just provide an example briefly of what you can do to break down a content standard. I have chosen a rather simple object lesson or a rather simple content standard so that we don't get lost in what the standard's saying, and instead we can focus on how to break it down. So the first thing you want to do is choose that content standard, or take that content standard that's been given to you. You'll see that in this one it says ask and answer questions about key details in a text. And that sounds somewhat easy, but when you really start to break that down, you realize that when you're asking a student to do these things, they have to have a number of prerequisite skills. And there's a number of things that you can teach the student and work on with the student in order to help them to meet this content standard. So the first thing you want to do is just make a list of all of the things that you'll need to teach the student, or the student will need to know, to be able to ask and answer questions about key details in the text. So I have gone ahead and just wrote a few of them that came to the top of my head at this time. The first is the student should be able to use and understand WH questions. So they should know that if you want to find out more about a story or review what happens in a story, you can always ask, who is it about? What is it about? Where did it take place? Why did this happen? So those WH questions are key. You have to explicitly teach those to students. And then they'll need to know what a key detail is, so make sure that they can clearly define and understand these words. Examples of what key details are: the vocabulary related to key details, what is a setting, who are characters, what kind of characters are there, what are story events such as climax, rising action, falling action, what is a story's conflict, what is a story's resolution, what is chronological order. And then when you teach students all of these tiny little vocabulary type elements, you'll have to make sure they know how to implement strategies to stop and ask themselves questions as they're reading, to make connections to characters, to paraphrase, to go back and check if they don't know an answer. Those are all strategies that need to be directly taught to the student. And moving on to number 12, it says looking at pictures. So using pictures, this is first grade, so they should be explicitly taught how to look at pictures to find clues about what's happening in the story. Teaching them to make personal connections to the characters, to what's happening in the story. And then I put comprehension because most of what the first 13 are about teaching comprehension skills. So comprehension is the big one here. So I just wanted to point out that just with that one content standard, I had probably 2-3 minutes where I typed out these 14 different areas that students need to be skilled in or have knowledge in to be able to meet this content standard. So it seems like a relatively simple standard, but there are so many skills and areas of knowledge that go with that. So I always suggest making a list of these, depending on the content standard you're working towards, and then choose the one that you think makes the most sense to teach for your lesson. This might mean you do a pre-assessment with students to find out what they do know. It may be that you start at the very beginning of all of this with just defining what key details are, giving examples, and possibly teaching WH questions. So for the sake of showing you how to create an objective based on these, I've chosen number 6, which is why it's bold. So I've chosen to focus on, for my lesson, who are the characters and what kind of characters are there. So by the end of my lesson, I want my students to be able to do this. Given a worksheet with the 2 types of characters at the top, I, for the sake of this, have decided that my 2 types of characters I'd be teaching a first grader in an introductory lesson would be main characters and supporting characters. The students will paste the correct characters under the correct heading with 100% accuracy. So picture a lesson where I'm defining what a main character is, defining what a supporting character is when we're reading a story, and I'm showing them examples of who are the main characters and who are supporting characters. And then for this particular worksheet, it would look like a sheet of paper with 2 columns. The left side says main characters, the right side says supporting characters, and then I also have pictures of each of the characters in the book, and asking them to cut each of those out, and then they'd paste it in the correct column. All right, so this is how you would take a large content standard. You would break that down into all of the skills that make up that content standard, and then you would choose which particular skill area or knowledge area you want to focus on. Now, as a teacher, you don't just randomly choose. You go in an order that makes sense for the student, in a logical order, so that what you're teaching them will build within each lesson. But for this sake of just showing you an objective and what it should look like, this is the example that I chose. Also remember that a high quality objective includes at the beginning a condition. The condition here is given a worksheet with the 2 types of characters at the top, and then there should be an observable behavior, and in this case the observable behavior is pasting the correct characters under the correct heading, and then there should be a mastery criteria, and I chose a mastery criteria of 100%. So your objective should also be in this format.